Chapter 10. Buck Wears Moccasins. The 30-mile river was wide open. Its wild, rushing waters did not freeze. Only in the eddies or quiet places did the ice take hold at all. 6 days of hard work and risk were required to cover those terrible miles on the Earth's surface. Perrault, who walked in front of the team, broke through the ice at least a dozen times. Each time he saved himself with a long pole he carried. He held it up so it fell across the hole made by his body as he went through the ice. Francois then ran forward and fished Perrault out. Perrault was almost incapable of climbing out by himself because the icy water at 50 degrees below zero paralyzed him. Time was lost from the run while a fire was built and Perrault and his clothes were dried. Once the sled itself broke through the ice. It dragged Dave and then Buck into the water. They were half frozen and all but drowned by the time the men rescued them. Their fur were solid coats of ice. Francois quickly built a fire, and the men kept the dogs on the run very close around the fire, sweating and thawing. Another time, Spitz went through the ice and dragged the whole team after him up to Buck. Buck strained backward with all his strength. His forepaws were on the slippery edge of the hole, with the ice all around him threatening to crumble. But behind him, Dave strained backward too, and Francois pulled back on the sled until his muscles almost ripped. They were able to hold that way until Perrault fished out the rest of the frozen, dripping team. Apart from the dangerous ice, Buck had another problem. Generations of easy living had softened the feet of his breed of dog. They were not as compact or as hard as the feet of the Huskies. So all day long, driver update. Generations of easy living had softened the feet of his breed of dog. They were not as compact or as hard as the feet of the Huskies, so all day long Buck limped in agony. When the run ended, he lay down like a dead dog. Hungry as he was, he would not move to receive his ration of fish, and Francois had to carry it to him. He also rubbed Buck's feet after dinner each night for a half hour. Finally, Perrault solved the problem. He sacrificed the top of his own moccasins to make 4 moccasins for Buck. This was a great relief. Later, Buck found his feet had grown hard to the trail, and the worn-out shoes were thrown away. Chapter 11. Mad Dog. As the long, hard runs continued day after day, Buck was gripped completely by the pride of the sled dog. To pull with all one's might, to run fast over the most difficult trail, to work with men, the sled, and one's fellow dog like a single machine for covering the miles, this was something to take pride in. And there were other prides the dog felt too. Dave, nearest the sled, was known as the wheel dog. He would have died sooner than give up his special place. And Spitz, as a lead dog, was in the position of king. It was his privilege to punish the dogs who blundered in the traces or hid away at the harness time in the morning. It was also his glory to stand at the head of the dogs and lead them on the trail. Buck, far back in the string of dogs, watched enviously every morning as Spitz was harnessed into the lead position. Ambition stirred in Buck, telling him that he belonged there. He knew that Spitz must die before he could take his place at the head of the string. Buck waited with great patience for his day of leadership to come. Though he was master of the team, Spitz was uneasy about Buck. This was the first dog from the south that had proven himself worthy on the trail and in camp. The others had been too soft, dying under the work, the frost, and the starvation. Buck had not only endured, he had prospered. and was now the equal or better of any husky in strength, savagery, and cunning. Buck worried Spitz. As Francois was harnessing up one morning, a long, heartbreaking wolf howl was sounded by Dolly. Its tone made all the dogs bristle with fear. Dolly gave just one howl, then sprang straight at Buck. Buck saw the mad light in her eye and did not stay to fight, though he could have beaten Dolly easily any other time. Instinct told him this was madness and to run from it. Buck ran faster and faster, but Dolly, given added strength from her madness, gained on him. Panting and frothing, she was only a leap behind Buck when he heard Francois call. Buck doubled back to camp, gasping painfully for air. He was putting all his faith in Francois to save him. He saw Francois poised with an upraised axe in his hands. Buck shot by him. Dolly followed, and Francois brought down the axe. Mad Dolly was dead, the victim of a bite from one of the mad wild dogs who had invaded the camp a few weeks ago. Buck staggered over against the sled, exhausted, helpless, and sobbing for breath. Spitz seized this opportunity to spring upon Buck, and his teeth tore the unresisting Buck's flesh to the bone. Suddenly, Francois's lash descended. Bucks had the satisfaction of watching Spitz receive the worst whipping ever given to any of the team. This incident decided Buck. He had been on the defensive too long. Now it would be Spitz's turn to defend himself against Buck's action. Chapter 12, A Team Divided. Buck became the leader, not of the team, but of a mutiny. One morning after a heavy snowfall, Pike, a lazy dog, would not appear to be harnessed. Francois called and called. Spitz, furious at Pike's disobedience, raged through the camp, digging in every likely spot, but Pike was well hidden under a foot of snow. When Pike was finally found, Spitz jumped to punish him, but Buck flew with equal rage between the two. Spitz was knocked off his feet in surprise. Pike, seeing this, jumped on Spitz too, and he and Buck tumbled the leader about. Francois, though he chuckled at the incident, nevertheless had to keep order. He whipped Buck thoroughly, and Spitz whipped Pike equally thoroughly. In the following days, Buck continued to interfere between Spitz and the dogs that he rightly wanted to punish, but he was careful to do so out of sight of Francois and his whip. Now, general disobedience took over, except for Dave and Solex. There was constant bickering and laziness. Pike even dared to rob Spitz of half a fish, which he then ate under the protection of Buck. Dub and Joe stood up together against Spitz, and he was unable to punish them as they deserved. The dogs lost all awe and fear of Spitz, and Buck never came near him without snarling and bristling. If the rebellion had been confined to camp, it would not have mattered so much, but it carried over to the trail. No longer did the team travel as one dog. Now the traces were frequently tangled. Time was lost while two dogs fought or refused to be harnessed. Francois used his whip constantly, trying to keep peace and to force the dogs to obey the leadership of Spitz as before. He knew Buck was the main troublemaker, but he was never able to catch him in the wrong after the first time when Pike had refused to come out of his nest. The team pulled into Dawson completely demoralized. Perrault was very late with his messages, which made him quarrel with Francois for not keeping the dogs in line, and Buck smiled at the ruined reign of Spitz.